consultant clinical psychologist, and I lead the psychological skills service. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you've already watched a previous video I made about an overview of PSS. This video is aimed at giving you a bit more information about the different interventions that we provide within the service. So this table has an overview of the different interventions. As I talked about in the last video, what we try and think about in PSS is giving people, well, what we do in PSS is we give everyone a trauma-informed formulation, so then a person can understand their difficulties in the context of what's happened to them and how it's affected them, and also to think about what intervention and what level of intervention is going to be most helpful for them, because we understand that for some people, they're ready for and need to have some skills before they can do any work that really explores or makes links to their past. And some people need psychological skills, other people need support and stability in their environment and help being able to establish that. So what we've tried to do in PSS is develop different levels of intervention, and then when we meet people for an assessment, we can help them to understand why we would recommend starting at a certain level. So I'm going to go through these different levels, which I gave a brief overview of last time in the previous video. So we have occupational therapists in PSS, so I'm going to just give a brief overview of the individual interventions that our OTs provide and the sensibility group, which is OT-led. So if you're referred for individual occupational therapy, you'll meet one of the therapists who will help you to complete an assessment of your sensory profile and develop an understanding of your specific sensory processing difficulties, and you'll then learn some strategies to manage difficulties in sensory modulation. We feel that there are some people where we've discovered after meeting lots of people in the service and doing lots of assessments that there are some people who struggle to stay within their window of tolerance, to manage to get to places, to manage to achieve, to have healthy relationships, to do the things that would improve their quality of life, partly because they have sensory sensitivities that they weren't previously aware of and or struggle to manage, and that these sensory so some of their senses are hyper aroused, so they're really sensitive to certain things like noise, to touch, to visual, to lighting, etc. And some of them are under aroused, so they're not reacting enough to things, and that causes people a lot of problems, and they often describe feeling very overwhelmed and not really knowing why they feel overwhelmed. So our occupational therapists will go and meet with people to help people to understand where their hyper and hypo sensitivities lie, and then to help them to develop ways of managing them, and they develop a sensory ladder. So this is done individually or in a group, and there are also reasons why people might have these sensory sensitivities, and that could be because of their neurodiversity. It could be because of exposure to a lot of trauma, which means that their threat system is so hyper aroused all of the time, and for them that represents itself, or that demonstrates itself in sensory hypersensitivities, because trauma looks very different. The effects of complex trauma look different for different people. So the occupational therapist will do this we'll do that piece of work individually, or help people practically to think about how they can make adaptations to their environment so that they can function better, for want of a better word. So they'll look at, what does this person need, what adaptations can we make so that you can reach your goals. I've just mentioned they'll develop a sensory ladder and look at what the evidence that people are over or under responsive. And then I mentioned that's done on an individual basis, but we also have a sensibility group. So that this is a face-to-face group that aims to help people build sensory awareness of themselves, others, and the environment, and increase self-control. So the group helps people to learn to understand their senses and which of those might be hyper or hyposensitive, and to use this awareness to either increase energy, because a lot of people, we think of people who are hypersensitive, who are highly reactive, but there's also those people who are underreactive to senses. So people who really struggle with energy and motivation, it might be that they're not sensitive enough, and so to increase energy, we might need to understand that from a sensory perspective. And by helping people to reduce the stress caused by under or over sensitivity, people's thinking brains are able to be engaged, because we can't, if our emotional systems are on too much. So it helps people to be able to problem solve and pay attention. So this is an overview of the group aims. And the group structure looks at helping people to understand the hypo or hypersensitivity in the different senses, and also looks at interoception. So a lot of people who are autistic really struggle to identify how their own body is feeling. People really struggle to label what their emotion is. So people mistake hunger and anxiety, for example. They don't really know what they're feeling, and so this difficulty is highly associated with neurodiversity, but also exposure to complex repeated trauma. So people who've been exposed to trauma learn to their bodies adapt by detaching from how they feel. So people really struggle to know how their body's feeling. So there's a session on that within the group. And then people are helped to build their own arousal ladder to help them to be able to stay in a range that's helpful. So I showed you a table at the beginning that showed we have different levels of therapy. In that same level 1, we also provide structured interventions, teaching skills. These are delivered by support workers and assistant psychologists. These skills are delivered through manuals. So we've written and adapted different manuals that are 8 sessions long. And what we're doing here is saying to someone, here are some skills that you have never learned and that would be helpful for you. We're going to go through this manual and help you to learn these skills. So there are skills about how you manage low mood, how you manage anxiety. There's graded exposure, and often this is done, the graded exposure is done in person. So our support workers might go to someone's house and help them if they need to get to a place, and think about how we can understand that in order to reduce anxiety, we have to gradually expose ourselves to the feared situation. We do it in stages, so they will do that. And we also help people to learn skills to manage their hearing voices. We provide skills about trauma stabilization, using ACT to build a meaningful life, and compassion-focused therapy for voices. So these are skills where we've explained to people in a formulation why they might lack those skills, or why they might need additional skills to help them, and how these difficulties might be the way that their brain has reacted to or try to cope with, or try to adapt to trauma they've experienced. And so we're saying, well, we know this is related to this has happened, to what's happened in the past, but let's start with this. Let's help you with these skills, because these skills are getting in the way of what you want to do in the here and now. People don't know about ACT, so most of the interventions are based on CBT, but we have ACT skills. So ACT is based on the idea that for some people we need to think about. So the ACT idea is that you're helping people to build a meaningful life despite things that have happened to them. So in ACT we help people to focus on values and identify their values, and think about, where do you want to go? What do you want the focus of your life to be like, and how can you stay focused on that? How can you not get hooked onto thoughts, the shoulds, the what ifs, the maybes? How can you not get attached to those and get unhooked, so that you can focus on the things that are meaningful to you? So ACT teaches a range of skills to help people to be able to achieve that goal. So some of that's about identifying values, some of it is about how you can stay in the present. So there's mindfulness incorporated into ACT, and strategies about how you can unhook from your thoughts. So unlike CBT, where people identify their thoughts and think about how you might challenge your thoughts, how you might create a rational argument to say, actually, no, that's a cognitive distortion. In ACT thinks of thoughts as that this is background noise. Let's find a way of being less distressed by our thoughts. So for some people, this is a really helpful approach, particularly people who have a lot of physical symptoms. But there's also an evidence base for people with OCD and for people who hear voices. So here's a brief overview. And a lot of people, if they've had a lot of criticism or a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of neglect in childhood, or just been in a constant state of threat where they can't really think, and they've been told everything about them is wrong, then they've got to adulthood not really knowing what they want to do with their lives, and because they don't really know what to do with their lives and what they value, people feel depressed. People keep trying to do lots of things and end up burning out. So this is also helpful for people. So this is a slide that just summarizes how ACT helps. So it helps people to be present, do what matters, and open up. And it's a very active model of therapy. So I'm just going to now talk about our Understanding Coping with Complex Trauma group. This is also something that we deliver one-to-one when people really struggle with the group environment. So this is a group intervention aimed at people who have a history of trauma and would like to learn more about the difficulties and skills to manage them. I'm just going to move back slightly. Sorry, this is only a rough video, because I didn't talk about the other skills in much detail. So let me do that before I move on to the groups. The Coping with Hearing Voices skills manual is purely based on CBT for psychosis, and it helps people to not to reduce their voices, but to reduce their belief about the power and the threat of the voices, and therefore the distress caused by voices. So people are given quite a lot of psychoeducation about how normal voices are, and the different things that might lead to voices, how voices can be associated with trauma. And then using CBT principles, people, so using cognitive challenges, behavioral challenges, people will work with a therapist to challenge the power and the meaning of the voices and their beliefs about that. In compassion focused therapy for voices, that 8-session manual is based on the compassion focused approach to voices from Eleanor Longden and Rufus May. And in that formulation, people understand their voices as an adaptive response to trauma. So they understand that because they have been exposed to lots of trauma in childhood, their threat system is now overactive, over sensitive, and their soothing system is underdeveloped, and their voices can be thought of as a loud representation of an overactive threat system. So it's almost like the voices are there to warn them of threat that their brain thinks is continually going to happen. So if I was someone who'd been abused as a child, my voices might keep telling me when I go out, that person's going to hurt you, he's going to kill you, she's going to harm you. And so voices might point out the threat that they think could happen, but they might also suggest things to the individual to help them to escape the threat that they think might happen. So, for example, you need to kill yourself. Don't go out. There's something bad about you. So the voices are representations of how a person feels, how their threat system sees threat everywhere, and attempts by the brain to keep a person safe. So, but these attempts are based on the beliefs of an exaggerated threat system. So a person is helped to understand that and help to find ways of seeing their voices as adaptive responses that were helpful and understandable at the time, but not very helpful now, and also to help a person build a sense of safety and soothing, because they've never learned how to do that because of early experiences. So that's the CFT approach. Okay, let's go back to my slides. So the trauma group is 12 sessions. So we have a trauma BPI. There's 10 sessions. So when I say BPI, I mean a trauma skills manual that's done individually, or a trauma group. We find the group is often more helpful because people realize there are other people who struggle with similar difficulties. And the group helps people to develop a compassionate understanding of trauma-related difficulties. It helps people to understand how their window of tolerance has been affected by trauma, and helps people to stay within their window. It helps people to be aware that the trauma they've experienced can lead to dissociation, beliefs about themselves as being bad, flashbacks and nightmares, and interpersonal difficulties. So the tendency to not to struggle to connect with people. And in the group, we help people to notice and be aware of times they become hyper aroused, shut down, or dissociate. We help people to learn some grounding skills to help them to reconnect with the present. We help people to regulate emotions so they can stay within their window of tolerance, and distress tolerance strategies so they can survive crisis periods when, for different reasons, they might be thrown out of their window of tolerance. So we're trying to help people to be able to stay present and help their thinking brain to stay on board. We help people to understand why flashbacks happen, and then to manage those flashbacks and nightmares. We also talk about what is a safe relationship, how do you know you're in a safe relationship, and how memories can be changed with new information, or how you perceive yourself can be changed. And the group is based on the idea that treatment for complex PTSD needs to be considered as a phased approach. It doesn't always need to be, but what the phased approach says is that it's quite hard for you to make sense of traumatic memories and to be able to stay online whilst you try and process memories if you don't have skills or stability in your relationships and in an environment. So it's helpful to be able to have those things first so that your brain can stay online and still think. These are the different sessions included in the group. We also have a schema therapy group. The schema therapy group is 24 sessions. It's a mixture of individual and group therapy. Schemas are templates or core beliefs that are formed from our early experiences and later reinforced. And it's thought that early maladaptive schemas, that's what we talk about in schema therapy, are as a result of toxic experiences in childhood where core needs weren't met. Core needs can be broken down into the needs related to attachment and the ability to express and assert yourself. So in schema therapy, we talk about, rather than talking about whether someone's experienced abuse, we talk about there being core needs that a child needs to be able to thrive, to be able to have a quality of life. And those include safety, secure attachment, appropriate boundaries for themselves and between others, autonomy, so the ability to be able to be themselves and to be appreciated for being themselves, and to be able to be okay with saying this is how I feel, and their emotions are okay, feeling important, loved and special. And that if those needs aren't met, then maladaptive schemas are formed. So an example of a schema is there's something bad about me, and it's called defectiveness in schema therapy. So someone who's always told or given the impression that there's something wrong about them might grow up thinking, actually, there is something bad about me. Emotional inhibition is another schema, which is it's not safe for me to share my emotions. I need to suppress my emotions. Schemas are thought to sleep in the background until they're woken up by a situation in the present that's similar to one in childhood. A bit like a schema is a very strong flashback that is a combination of beliefs, feelings, and behaviours. So people can be going about their everyday routine, and then they receive an email that asks them to come to their boss's office, and their defectiveness schema gets activated, that I'm bad, and that will set off lots of feelings like panic, shame, and then lots of strategies that are bigger than the situation requires, which is just someone being asked to go to an office. And if a schema is activated, it included on the present, so the person feels that same set level of emotion as they might have done when original traumas, when those needs weren't met, were happening, so that they feel like they did when they were a child, when they were being punished for just being them, or they were always told it was them to blame. It's like stepping on a landmine, and when you step onto that schema, it's like a short video clip that stores memories, thoughts, and bodily sensations is activated. And in schema therapy, we talk about how in order to survive life with these schemas, people develop different coping styles, which help them to manage the world with this perspective, but also cause problems. So people either overcompensate, try and act the opposite. So if I felt defective, then what I might do is I might be that person who does more work than everyone else. So I might try and please everyone in the office, work longer hours, say yes to everything. Does mean that I don't fail, but also means I burn out. Avoidance is another style of coping. So I might just not go to work. I might call in sick. I might avoid speaking to people. I might avoid developing close relationships or surrender. So I might just give in to that belief. So I might just tell my boss where to go and just deliberately quit. Or if I might do things that push people away. And we also talk about in schema therapy, schema modes, and this is what we see in the therapy room or in a person's life when a schema is activated. And we talk about different types of modes. We talk about child modes, which is the emotions that a person feels when a schema is activated. So we call them child modes because they're the innate emotions that a person might have felt it in the past when they were led to believe that there was something bad about them. So that's fear, sadness, loneliness, and they're really intense states, and or anger, because we can have a vulnerable child mode, feeling sad and lonely, but an angry child that's, my needs weren't met, you should meet my needs. We talk about inner critic modes. So that's where we think of these as the internalized messages that people had from their past experiences that are either demanding or punitive. So when that person gets the email from their boss saying, "Can I speak to you?" They might get a thought or a voice in their head that says, "You see, you're stupid. No one likes you." And that's because when that schema is activated, it reminds them of situations in the past and those messages they received. Or they might get a more demanding voice, which is, you need to do this in order to be good enough. So we help people to identify those. If that's going on, that's usually part of what happens, or part of the reason why people continue to feel ashamed or keep pushing themselves too much. And then we have maladaptive coping modes, which are the different strategies that people use to try and cope. So that I just talked on the previous slide. Some of the coping modes are avoidant. So I might avoid the situation. That's an avoidant protector. I might avoid the emotion by detaching and by dissociating. We call that detached protector. Or I might do more and try and please everyone. And in schema therapy, that's called a perfectionist over controller. I might attack other people first, or because then people won't attack me. So we help people to identify the particular style that they go into, and we call those modes. And I haven't put this on this slide. We also in schema therapy talk about a healthy adult mode and a happy child mode, and those are the modes in schema therapy we're trying to help people build. And the healthy adult is able to take a step back and see what's going on for you as a person at that time. So why is this happening? Why am I being triggered? How is it linked to my past? What's going on? What do I need? How can I express that effectively? And how can I manage these different reactions that are coming up now more effectively? And where do I want to go in life? And the happy child mode is about playing, because play is just really important. And lots of people, if they haven't had their core needs met, just don't know how to play. So we have a combination of individual and group, so that people can learn the skills in the groups, and then in the individual sessions we build a schema formulation, and we do some of and we use some strategies using imagery and chairs to help people to understand how their modes get in the way, to have conversations with the modes in order to manage them, and to do some imagery re-scripting of childhood experiences that link to the modes themselves. So we're trying to revisit and decouple childhood experiences that caused the beliefs in the present. And in the groups, we go through lots of strategies that draw on not only schema therapy, but also CBT, ACT, and compassion focused therapy, because schema therapy is an integrative therapy. Compassion focused therapy, this is one of our skills that we do individually, and people learn how exposure to lots of trauma can mean that they're threat. So in compassion focused therapy, we talk about there being three systems in the brain: the threat system, the soothing system, and the drive system. And when your brain is exposed to repeated trauma, as a survival response, it keeps the threat system permanently on and makes it more sensitive or overactive, because it thinks, well, I just need to spot threat earlier. I need to stay on. I need to make sure I don't ever I'm not ever exposed to harm. And so it just stays on and stays really sensitive. And that means that you react to things that aren't threatening, but your brain has decided it needs to lower the bar so much that it thinks of threatening. And because of being in a state of threat a lot, and perhaps missing out on core caregiving, the soothing system that you need to soothe that threat system isn't fully developed. And we also know from brain studies, there's a better word for that, so MRIs and those kinds of things, that parts of the brain that are needed for soothing and rational thought are underdeveloped in people who've been exposed to complex trauma. And neurotransmitters that are involved in soothing, like serotonin and GABA, are also reduced in people who've been exposed to complex trauma. So there's a biological basis of this theory. So in compassion focused therapy, we help people to develop their soothing system using imagery, letter writing, developing compassionate image, breathing strategies, and helping people really to develop compassion towards themselves and others. We also do deliver trauma processing therapies. So this is the final level of our service. So we have some therapists who deliver EMDR, trauma-focused CBT, schema therapy, and compassion-focused trauma therapy. We have a leaflet for this, which is on our website. And what we tell people is we will be drawing on different evidence-based therapies depending on what we think might be helpful for you to process trauma. So the therapist within the service will often use a combination of these depending on what's going to be most helpful for service users. I'm going to flip this. I'm not going to talk much about trauma-focused CBT because you might know a bit about that, but I guess for all of these therapies, what we're trying to do is process and re-examine the trauma, because the idea of PTSD, whether it's complex or normal PTSD, is one of the reasons that people keep having flashbacks or feeling in a chronic state of threat, is because when you're in a state of threat, your brain isn't able to process what's happening properly and put it into the part of your brain that knows it's a memory. So it stays in the part of your brain called the amygdala, where it's in lots of fragments. It's not time stamped, so your brain doesn't know that it's in the past and it's finished. What the amygdala has keeps those memories in this mishmash state of emotions and physical feelings that are very easily triggered by anything that's remotely similar. So whilst memories are stored there, whilst you're walking down the street, it's much easier for you to for that part of the memory to be triggered, and then for you to feel like you're back in the past again, and you So you might feel like you're going to die, or you feel like something bad's going to happen, or you feel that same level of shame or guilt that you did then, but actually you don't really know why. It feels like it's coming from the present because of the way that memories are stored. So part of trauma reprocessing work is to help people to pull all those memories out, to look at them and file them in the correct place. And for some people, CBT is a more helpful way of doing that. So in CBT, people talk through their memories, and the therapist helps them to challenge certain hotspots in the memory, certain beliefs that mean that the memory keeps getting stuck and hasn't been processed before. Whereas in EMDR, using bilateral eye movements, people process the memory, but there's very little speaking. So using bilateral eye movements, people are able to stay grounded whilst their brain goes through the memory by itself. So the idea is that you go through and your brain does the processing by itself, and that eye movements help you to be able to stay in the present whilst doing that, and also a thought to help the processing. And different approaches work for different people. In all of the approaches, as well as trying to process the memories, what you're also trying to do is challenge the beliefs or reevaluate the beliefs someone has about themselves or the world that have occurred due to that trauma. So, for example, if someone has had a history of sexual abuse and they believe that it was their fault, there's something bad about them, and that belief hasn't been, they haven't been able to challenge that belief because their memory of that event is fragmented. And if they had the whole memory of that event and were able to take a step back and see the event in detail as an adult, they might have the details that they need to realize actually there was nothing they could do. They were very small. Their perpetrator was very big. There was nowhere for them to go. That it wouldn't have been adaptive for them to fight back. Their only option was to freeze. But a person needs to be able to see the memory and slow it down and see all the fragments and see it from as an adult in detail in order to challenge those beliefs. Sometimes people, when they try and process their memories, because of the messages they've received so frequently in childhood that tell them you're a bad person, it's your fault, even when they look at the memory in detail, they still can't shift that belief. That belief still stays, and that's often where we bring in compassion focused therapy approaches and schema focused therapy, which involve a bit more re-scripting, because sometimes people need the therapist to provide an interweave or a challenge that helps them to be able to see what should have happened. I'm not going to talk through all these slides because I've talked for ages. So I hope that this gives you an overview of some of the things that are offered in PSS. I suppose my one final thing, which I really missed out on, I'm so sorry about. I'm going to go right back to that original table, because I mentioned OT, I mentioned skills, but we also, and then I mentioned the groups, and then I mentioned EMDR. But if you see this level 2 psychological therapy, I forgot to talk a bit more about that. Psychological therapy is when a service user will meet with one of our clinical associate psychologists for 10 sessions, and the therapist will work with them to make sense of why they're struggling with these difficulties, how it relates to what's happened to them, and how they link together. So that they'll go over the assessment and bring that together for the person, and then they'll make a plan with the services they're working with about the difficulties and what to tackle in what order. So they'll draw on the skills manuals that the support workers and assistant psychologists have, but they might draw on a number of manuals and skills and incorporate that into a formulation. So it's more flexible, because what you're doing is not just teaching skills, you're helping people relate those skills to them and think about how, for example, they might hear voices and have flashbacks, and how those things are related, and try and address and try and teach some skills for both of those difficulties within the same therapy episode. So we offer that to people who are ready to do that. Some people are. Some people prefer to just have skills, and then we think about the other levels too. So I hope that provides an overview of our interventions. All of this stuff is on our website. If you search the Psychological Skills Service, there's leaflets for all of the interventions, which probably describe them better than I can. And yeah, thank you so much.